It's time to enter the drone zone with me, James Drone, aka Pure Ambient Drone. So hit that subscribe button, tap that bell, and get ready to synth on.
Hey there, Synths. We are back with episode number 107 of Midnight Synthesizer Talk. I'm Pure Ambient Drone, the voice of synthesizers. Yeah. Man, digital versus analog synthesizers. Which one is right for you and why? Well, that is a question that only you can answer, but with a little bit of input here, I might be able to help you out a little bit. So analog versus digital is what I really want to talk about today. And it basically has to do with what you want with a synthesizer and the sound that you are looking for. And so I often get this question in my inbox of messages. I want to put a studio together. I want to be able to have a nice, clean sound. Do I want to go analog? Do I want to go digital? The answer to this question is very, very complex because every studio is different. Everybody's needs are different. And the wants and desires of people are exceptionally different as well. So when you're looking at building a studio of synthesizers, you have to look at the genre of music you want to touch on. You want to have a roadmap pretty much of where you want to go and how you want to get there. So I often start with the sound that I'm looking for when I want to do an album, for instance. And I did an album called Calm, Relaxing Space Music some time ago. And I thought to myself, I want this to be a really sci-fi, futuristic, spacey kind of sounding album. And so I elected to use absolutely no analog synthesizers on the entire album. And I found at the end of the project that by not using any of the analog synthesizers that I have, a different sound and a different approach to creating the album had occurred. It was a totally different experience. Things that I would normally use analog for, I substituted for the digital. And there were some things that I had to implement in order to get what I thought was the sound I was looking for. And in the middle of the project of doing a fully digital album, and I say digitally because that's all the synths I use, that's what I mean by that. I found that I had to stop trying to recreate the analog sound. You see, that's what happens in our mind. We get caught up with, I need to make this sound more analog. But the whole idea of me creating this album with the digital synthesizers was to get away from the analog sound to begin with. So halfway through this album, as I'm mixing the synths together for the tracks, I realized what I was doing. I was trying to get a lot of analog sound out of it in the lower end, because where you can tell the difference in analog is in the lower end. In my humble opinion, there seems to be something really nice and fat about the analog bottom end on many analog synthesizers. But that's a whole different subject. I don't even want to go down that rabbit hole. I'm just talking about my experience and how I'm using my synthesizers for the low end. So here I was using digital synthesizers and trying to emulate the analog. And then I realized, if I'm going to make this album, I don't want it to sound analog. And so getting back on topic, the biggest thing that I noticed is that, yes, when you're using digital, you're going to find yourself in most situations with digital synthesizers that they're loaded with effects, and it's very tempting to crank up the effects, because that's where a digital synthesizer really shines, is that the manufacturers, they load these things up with all kinds of effects. And I think it's perhaps maybe to compensate for some of the lack of analog sound. Again, I want to stress that I think the reason for using digital synthesizers is because you're looking for a particular sound. And I came to this conclusion, one, by doing two separate albums. One of them was fully digital, and then the other one was completely analog. I did another album that was completely done with nothing but 100% analog synthesizers. I didn't use any digital on it. It's called Relaxing Music for Sleep. There's not one digital synthesizer on the entire album. And I found that that too had a different feel, and the process of mixing and putting the album together turned out to be a totally different experience from the calm, relaxing space music album that I had done. So when I was working on calm, relaxing space music, I was trying at first to emulate analog. Now, here's the funny thing. I went on to make the second album that was fully analog, Relaxing Music for Sleep. And what happened? I started manipulating the sounds to sound more digital. You can see where this is becoming a big loop where, if you're not using a hybrid studio where you have digital synths and analog synths, you can find yourself teeter-tottering, trying to get the sounds that you want depending on what kind of track and album you're trying to make. And again, I had to stop myself and say to myself, hey, this is an analog album, and it should sound like an analog album. It shouldn't sound like an analog synth trying to emulate a digital synth. And I wasn't consciously trying to do that, but subconsciously, I was just getting into my workflow of a hybrid studio. And that's what I have today. I have a very hybrid studio of digital synthesizers and analog synthesizers. And then I have some hybrid synthesizers that are a little bit of both. And I find it's like a painter's canvas when you're making a track or an album. You want to take your brush, if you will, and you want to get the right colors to set the mood in the picture you're trying to paint. And sometimes you have to take colors and you have to mix them together to create a different shade of color. And that's where it comes into, do you want an analog album? Do you want an analog studio and sound? Do you want all digital? So I would say it depends on the genre. Now, analog by nature is going to cost you more money. So I would recommend that if you're going to get into analog on a budget and you need a poly analog synth, that you pick very carefully on what you get. And some of my recommendations for a poly synth would include, but not limited to, the Korg Prologue, either 8 or 16 voice. Those are great. If you're really on a budget, you could go with the Prologue XD. Now, these are hybrid synthesizers, meaning that there's some analog and some digital in there for you to choose from. Of course, if you're really on a budget and you need a poly synth that is analog, you could always go with the Behringer DeepMind 12 or even the 6 voice. They're both great synthesizers and will certainly give you a lot of analog for the money. If you want to go up in price and you really want to spend some extra dollars, you could go to a Polybrute, which I also have one of those. And I have to tell you, it is one of the best sounding synthesizers that I have in my studio that is analog, because it really does shine in the effect department. It has beautiful sounding, creamy VCOs, but it does come at a above $2,000 price tag. Okay. You're going to look at about $2,700 before taxes and additional cost of shipping, if any. It's up there in price. Some other good companies to look into if you're wanting to go higher end would be Sequential. They also have a starter synthesizer that they're calling it a starter synthesizer. The Take 5, I think that would be a great middle ground for anyone who wants to build something with some really high quality synthesizer sounds that are analog and has a nice support system. Sequential has one of the best support systems I've ever experienced in the business when it comes to needing help with your synthesizer. They're really good. They're US based. They build all of their stuff here in America. I do believe that they outsource some of their parts overseas, but all of their tech support is handled in America, and they're very, very good at what they do over there. So yeah, those are some options. Now, if you're just convinced that you need something that sounds more digital, but it's still hybrid, you can go with something like the Novation Summit. You can get a used, because they don't make them new anymore, Prophet 12. And I bring these synthesizers up to you because they are digital synthesizers with analog filters. And when you run the sound through them, the analog filters give it some warmth. That's the only way that I can describe it, if warmth is even a word. There's also the Phantom 2019. A lot of people may be unaware of this, but the Phantom 2019, it is a digital synthesizer, but it has analog filters. And so it is the only one of the Xenology synthesizers that I'm aware of to date of this video that actually has analog filters that the synth is running through. So those are some options. Now, if you want to go completely digital and you're looking for just digital synthesizers, one of my all-time favorite synthesizers that is digital is a Waldorf Iridium. And it is completely digital. Its brother sister is the Quantum. Now, the Quantum is completely digital, but it has an analog filter that is mono. And so it is a hybrid. So I don't want you to confuse the Iridium from the Quantum. There are some subtle differences that can make a big difference if you are particularly looking for something that is digital all the way through. Now, I do have the Hydra synthesizer. I have the 49 key version. It is, to me, one of the most amazing digital synthesizers I have ever heard. And it cuts through a mix beautifully. It absolutely floors me how well it can cut through a mix. I sometimes have problems with digital synthesizers cutting through a mix because there's simply too much fat going on with the analog, if you will. And that brings me back to my all analog synthesizer album that I had done, Relaxing Music for Sleep. I kind of realized at the end of this album that it was a little too thick. It was a little too full. And I had to go back and cut some of the mids and cut some of the lower end out on some of the tracks, a little more than I would on a digital track. And then likewise, with my all digital album, Calm, Relaxing Space Music, I had to go in and kind of fill in some mids and some lower end on some of the tracks just so it wouldn't sound too thin. And so when you're talking about the Hydra, you're going to be able to get a synthesizer sound that's going to cut through the analog that you're using on top or below it. And I like that about the Hydra very much. Now, I've been talking about this on my channel quite a bit. I have these things I call my synth jams. And it's a table that I have dedicated. At this point in time, the entire setup is Roland. It's all digital. And I did get a JDXA, which is a hybrid synthesizer, to go into the mixes that I'm doing. And you can check those out. I'll leave a link somewhere in the description and or the comment section to my Synth Jam playlist. You'll be able to see on video the gear that I'm using. So this table that I've dedicated to my synth jams, it's a complete construct of mostly or all rolling gear, depending on what I'm doing on that day. And everything is going into a MX1 mixer by Roland. Now, it is a secondary interface for my audio that I have for my studio. I have a PreSonus Live 32 for my other gear that I use for my studio albums. So that's what I have done. I have split my studio in half, if you will. One part of it is dedicated to synth jams. That's all live playing. I make videos. I try to come out with one once a week. And then the other half of the studio is dedicated to what I would use for studio productions, because I do a lot of music licensing and other stuff besides just albums. And so I need that gear for that particular part of my music business that I do. So, is analog or digital better than one another? No. Are they equal? Well, yes and no. It just depends on what you're looking for. I do know this. When digital synthesizers started coming about, mostly in the 90s, they started making a really big splash in the 90s. Analog started phasing out and more digital synthesizers started coming into play. And people started dumping their analog gear to get that digital capability that they felt they were missing with analog. And so analog is more expensive than digital when you compare them side by side for what you're going to get on the features. But some people just prefer the sound of analog over digital. And then there's other people that are exact opposite. They prefer the sound of digital over analog. It just really depends on what you're looking for. I would say that you're going to have to experiment if you have absolutely no experience with either of these machines. You need to just kind of experiment with what works for you. Just understand that because analog is more expensive, you can end up buying a synthesizer that is all analog and not really see some of the features and the bells and the whistles, or even the polyphony. That's the big thing, polyphony, that you would normally see in a digital synthesizer. And that is a big feature of digital synthesizers, because you could go out and get a digital synthesizer with 128, 256 polyphony. However, with analog, you can go all the way down to one voice and go up from there. You know, they got 4-voice analog. They've got 6-voice analog, 8-voice analog, 16-voice analog. I don't think I've seen anything more than 16 voices on an analog synthesizer. I don't really think they make anything above 16 voices for an analog synth, unless you're going to be able to polychain something. And I couldn't tell you even then what synthesizer would go above 16 voices. So you're going to run into a polyphony limit if you go into analog. And that may be important to you, especially if your style of playing is more towards piano player than synth player, because there is a big difference between being a synth player and a piano player. So anyway, I hope that this discussion has opened your mind up a little bit to think about some things, digital versus analog. And the conversation can continue in the comments section. I welcome everybody to just join in and talk. I love to hear from you. I'm Pure Ambient Drone. Until next time, hit that subscribe button, tap that bell, and above all, keep calm and synth on.